Hi everybody, so today we're going to talk about communicating in the workplace, and I'm going to see if I can do it in under 15 minutes. Anybody that knows me knows that I can talk, and especially when I'm doing a PowerPoint. So unfortunately I'm not able to show the PowerPoint to you, but I will walk you through it, and then if you happen to have access to it, which one of you will, you're certainly welcome to follow along. So the first slide talks about communication in the workplace. My name's Dwayne, and we are going to go into who are you and how do you fit in. So in this case, you are a new tenure track faculty member at a California community college, which means that you are a stakeholder in all of this. And so we're going to talk to you specifically. How we're going to approach communication is as you being this person, a tenure track faculty member at California Community College. Okay, slide number 3, it talks about communication. Communication is complex and imprecise. So communication is not a precise thing. When somebody talks to you, you hear it in the way that you perceive it. The receiver receives it in however they receive it. If they have good analytical skills, they're listening for tone of voice. If you're live and in person, they're watching you, they're checking out your body behavior, your eye contact, your confidence in your delivery, if you have a speech that's sort of on the side of being unsure, do you have lots of ums and ah and pauses within your delivery, or are you very direct and conveying everything appropriately without a lot of pauses and hedging? We're talking about a nonlinear process of communication, which means it is not from me to you and then you back to me. It's actually a dynamic process, which is interactive, where communication is happening simultaneously, both sending and receiving messages. So if we were live and in person, I would be talking to you and I would see your acknowledgement. So I would see, as students or as a participant in the room, I would see possible head nods, I would see possible eye acknowledgement, I would see possible confused faces, I would see possible bored faces, and we would be sending and receiving those messages simultaneously, which means we're both doing both sending and receiving communication at the same time. So it's an interactive and it's a dynamic process, and it happens simultaneously. It is the primary way that relationships are formed and maintained. As you know, if you don't communicate with someone, how will you ever form a relationship with them? And if you don't continue to communicate with someone, how will you maintain a relationship? So in the 21st century, we've actually learned how to maintain relationships with people that we had left in our past. So in my dad's time, he's a little older, he's in his late 70s, he would have possibly lost contact with lots of his high school classmates because you don't interact with them in person frequently or at all. And in the era of the 21st century, we have social media, so we're in contact with people that we may or may not really have been friends with in the past, but we connect with them through the social media, through online, and we have relationships such as they are, if you're my Facebook friend, online. Slide number 4, for those of you following, talks about pragmatic rules. Pragmatic rules help us make sense of the language that we encounter in our interactions with others and determine the meaning of the utterance within the given context. So it doesn't mean, by the way, an utterance doesn't mean it has to be words. I could walk into my brother, for example, and say, and he'll go, and we know what that means to each other because we communicate that all the time. So if you're not sure what pragmatic is, it's an adjective. It means sensible. Synonyms are businesslike, common sense, down to earth, efficient, and a whole list of others. And so pragmatic rules means you're very able to sort of analytically figure out the process in which communication takes place, and that you know that you're a part of it. Slide number 5, effective communication requires communication competence. That includes analytical thinking, effective listening, and clear expression of the message. So a lot of times when people think about communication, they tend to go one-sided, where they think that it is one person talking to another, but it's actually that plus it's the person who's listening, and if they're effectively listening by being attentive, by trying to figure out what is actually being said, is there an underlying meaning in what's being said or not, such things like that. Is the message being delivered clearly as well? Let me see. I'm just looking at my notes on the slide. Being professional in your delivery and your communication will help you be approachable when you engage appropriately with others on campus. Let's go to slide number 6. Context is key. So contextual environment includes the physical location of the interaction as well as the personal history of participants. Context includes who, what, when, where, why, and how. All the WH questions involved that we ask related to situations. So who is communicating? What are they communicating? When are they communicating? Where are they communicating? Why are they communicating? And how are they communicating? All of those are parts of communication. They're part of the context, because we don't all always communicate live. As you can see, I'm communicating to you through video, and I'm hoping that you're receiving the communication effectively in a way that makes sense to you, that you can follow, and that you find articulate and well delivered. And so context is important for all communicators. Now, for me, because I'm a sign language interpreter and I teach interpreters quite frequently, I spend a lot of time on picking apart context, because as an interpreter, if I show up to one assignment, the people involved can change. If it's the same, let's say I go to the same place 2 days in a row, but one person changes in the whole contextual environment, that might affect the whole interpreting situation. Having one different hearing person or having one different deaf person could change the whole dynamic of being at a place. So context is very key in communication. What slide am I on? Slide number 7. The physical location. So let's talk a little bit about that. As an employee of a community college, as a new faculty member, you're going to be in a classroom a lot, you're going to be in an office a lot, and you're going to be out on the general campus a lot. And so when you're communicating in the classroom, you've got dynamics to figure out with students, and that includes group communication. Do you have everybody's attention? How are you communicating with them? Are you separating them out into small groups, and then are you interacting with those small groups? Are you having them work individually, and then are you providing one-on-one type of assistance or communication? So there's that in a classroom. In an office, when students come in to visit you, you should pay attention to other people that are around, depending on the topic, right? The what are you talking about? Because if they're talking about their grades, it's not anybody else's business to know what their grade is. That's just between the student and the faculty member. And so keeping those kinds of things in mind, again, we go back to context, is important. Slide number 8 talks about the personal history. So as you get to know people on campus, it's possible that when you got hired on a campus, you might have already knew people. But in some cases, you're brand new onto that campus and you don't know anybody. And as you communicate with people, you start to develop relationships and you talk with them. And in some cases, you'll have relationships that are supervisor-employee. There may be colleague type of relationships. And some of these people may turn into being your friends. Plus, you'll have student-teacher relationships as well. So you have to be attentive to the role that you are with the person or people in which you are having communication. Slide number 9, we talk about context also includes shared experiences. So sometimes your colleagues, because they are out in the classroom with you, they'll understand the dynamic of having students in class and the group personality versus individual student personality, because every student has their own personality, but when they get together as a group, there happens to be a group personality as well. Some class groups have a really dynamic, wonderful personality, maybe even some sense of humor, and other class groups, they may be challenging to deal with depending on if they get along with one another and what the topic of the course is and their level of interest in that. Slide number 10, we go to types of relationships at work. So again, keeping in mind status of who you are and who the people are that you're communicating with. So we have administrator, employee, teacher, student, teacher, teacher, and staff, faculty. And when I talk about staff, faculty, those are the people who, in California, we call them classified employees, and they're the people who do a lot of the clerical work, and they are equal to you as a faculty member. Now, when communicating with them, you have to keep in mind, however, that they probably don't make as much money as you, and they probably work longer and harder hours on site, because they're the ones who have to go into the office. They're the ones who have to be there all day. They're processing information. They're dealing with students all the time. They're dealing with other faculty members all the time. And you go into a classroom, and in a California community college, you're in the classroom for 15 hours a week as a full-timer. That's it. And then you have other duties that you deal with outside, but sometimes those duties can seem kind of light as compared to what a staff member does or a classified employee. So keep that in mind, because they are really your equals, even though people often think of them as clerical workers. And let's see, slide number 11. We have registers in language. So we have frozen register, frozen text. As a sign language interpreter, we deal with frequently. We'll hear things like the Pledge of Allegiance, the Lord's Prayer, anything that's been written down, the Miranda rights. Those are dealt with in English. They're always the same. Now, in sign language, so I'm going to sidetrack just a little bit. In sign language, we don't have frozen text. There is nothing in sign language, in American Sign Language, that is frozen at the moment. So someday there may be, but currently there is not. There is nothing in American Sign Language that is frozen, that everybody does exactly the same. When I talk about that, I'm talking about things like the Pledge of Allegiance, which in English everybody says the same way. The Miranda rights in English are said the same way every time. So keep that in mind. We have formal register. Formal register is often somebody in a platform type situation. As a new teacher, it could be that you're lecturing to students, and sometimes when you're lecturing, you just want to convey the information and you want them to receive it and take notes, but not every person is a open communication type of person while they're lecturing, meaning not everybody's personality says, please interrupt me while I'm talking, right? So some instructors, when they're lecturing, actually want to get through their lecture, and then they'll handle question and answers. Other instructors, and sometimes that same instructor, depending on the course, will have more dialogue. So for example, I have a course where I try to engage the whole class in dialogue regularly. I try not to lecture it very often. Some days I need to get through certain materials, but most of the time in a particular course, I'm trying to get everybody to interact so that they can see the dynamic of interaction. Consultative is things like teacher-student. If you're out in the world, it would be doctor, patient. But teacher-student is in sort of the one-on-one type of a situation or small group type of thing, because that allows for more dynamic communication on both sides, meaning both people being able to express themselves. In a formal situation, it's a little one-sided. Somebody in front of the room delivering information and having control of Q&A. In consultative, it's a little bit more interactive. Informal and casual, you'll probably have that kind of interaction with certain colleagues that you might become friends with. Intimate, I don't know on how you are with your working place on whether or not you would ever get to having an intimate type of communication with somebody where you walk up and you can go, hey, what's going on? And they go, eh, and you know what they mean, and you have that type of rapport. I imagine that happens as you get to know people and you become closer with them. So that's kind of a dynamic that you have to consider on what are your boundaries as well with colleagues and students. Slide number 12, we talk about cultural and linguistic backgrounds. In California, as is most of the country, but very specifically in California, diversity is diversity is diversity. It's everywhere. There's not really a place you can go where all the people are going to be the same as you, whoever you are, right? So when I grew up in Utah, it was kind of normal for me to be able to go to certain places and be with other Caucasian people and not really have any interaction with people outside of that. So this, I'm talking about the 70s and kind of early 80s. But in California, that's nearly impossible for any particular cultural or ethnic group to not have somebody else from some other cultural group at a venue, in an interactive setting, whatever. And so at college, it's diverse. So be open to diversity, be open to different people who grew up in the United States, be open to different people who are immigrants into the United States, and be open to linguistic issues that come with that as well, because sometimes phrases from one part of the country can be different when they move to a new part of the country. In California, we often say soda. Down south, they'll say Coke when they mean any kind of flavor of soda. And in Utah, we say pop, I want a pop. So, sometimes there's that's just a tiny little example of within the country. Plus, you have people from other countries coming in and talking, and they have their own linguistic issues, and especially if they're first generation and or the direct immigrant. They're dealing with their own language and ESL issues, English as a second language issues. Slide number 13, ways that you will communicate will be live and in person with the full class or one-on-one. You'll communicate through email. You need to make sure that you know how to communicate effectively through email, because people don't read things the way you send them. Your personality does not come through in email or text. And half the time, even when you have little emoticons that you use, your personality does not come through. People hear how they hear it. So email, be very clear and concise in what you mean, and be direct but respectful. You'll have online platforms if you teach online. So in some colleges, like North Central University, it's a one-on-one type of a situation. In other colleges, like community colleges in California, you probably have a whole classroom full of students that could be anywhere from 10 to 35 students or even more, depending on your school. And you need to be able to effectively manage chat rooms, discussion boards, individual assignments, etc. You'll also be communicating with people by phone, both live and through voicemail. So you want to make sure that you're effective in that communication as well. And then in the 21st century, we have social media. And so for example, Facebook, you can have a fan page or a discussion group where where the participants don't see whoever the leader of that discussion group is, they don't see your profile. However, when people join that group, a lot of times you can see their profiles and who they all are. And so you got to keep that in mind, because that might not be the best way to go for you. But for some of you, that social media interaction is key in having your students come together and interact. So it's kind of a new emerging way to communicate with people. And we'll have to see over time how effective it is and what are some of the challenges that we face when we use it. Communicating respectfully is ultimately the goal. So just keep that in mind, that no matter how you're communicating, both expressive communication and receptive communication, do it in a respectful manner for your supervisors, for your peers, for your colleagues, and for your students, because ultimately in a workplace environment, you have to communicate with a wide range of people, and in the end, respect is key. So keep that in mind. There's some various resources, such as a book called Communication Between Cultures. You might find stuff in a dictionary of cultural literacy, which I did not use in this particular presentation, but I have it. You might have sources like Sign Language Interpreting, Exploring Its Arts and Science, So You Want to Be an Interpreter, and a whole bunch of other resources. I've got stacks of books if the video camera's not picking up, but I've got 3 computers sitting in front of me, books all over the place, papers all over the place. I'm happy to talk to you. If you're watching this, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I shall see you again.